Hello, Telegram group. What's that? Where's that shadow? Darn it. I thought I got rid of it. All right. I'm going to have to move this mic down a shelf, I think, in the future or something. I mean, it's all, your hair looks great, but I got all these shadows everywhere.
I don't know where that shadow is coming from.
It's coming from a light.
How about, how cause and effect and things like that? Let's talk about one of our Christmas presents.
Oh, yeah.
This is from Blockstream. The Adam Back and Samson Mao operation. There's their little logo. They sent us this coffee mug.
Yeah, it's supposed to change color with hot water. Let's see if it works. Here we go. It's supposed to make Bitcoin appear.
It's like magic. It's like magic internet money. So theoretically, this should show up as I see the orange rising.
Do you?
I see the orange rising. Look at that. Look how cool it is. Look at that. Look at it.
Oh, yeah. Where's mine? There it is.
It's coming up. It's like a full moon rising.
The orange pill is happening.
I love it.
Lovely. Thank you, Adam Back and Samson Mao from Blockstream for that cool swag.
Yeah, we love the swag. I have some topics I want to discuss here. In this episode of Orange Pill, we have a great interview with Saif Dina Moose coming up. But first, I want to talk about sisu. Because, we all tell each other stories of how to be positive and Bitcoin as a narrative. And this is Renaissance 2.0. And the part of the Orange Pill group is that we're all sharing the story together and keeping positive and looking forward to the future. So I want to talk about sisu because this is something that I could bring to the table in terms of what I've experienced and learned in life as a Finnish American. And it's a very Finnish American concept from Finland, brought here from Finland. And sisu is described in Wikipedia, a Finnish concept described as stoic determination, tenacity of purpose, grit, bravery, resilience, and hardiness, and is held by Finns themselves to express their national character. It is generally considered not to have a literal equivalent in English. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is this mindset of Bitcoin is, I think, when I look at it, fits in with this mindset of sisu, because psychologists are now starting to apply it to the real world. It's part of positive psychology, that it's considered an action mindset and a narrative and a cultural construct, that the Finns themselves, they're not born with this sisu. They create it through the stories you're told as a child and the actions you have to take as an adult. So with that, we're going to look at the two, since there are no English words to explain it, you could explain it by looking at the Diego Maradona of the ski jumping world. Say the Finns excel in ski jumping, right? And what does ski jumping require but bravery, like sheer extreme bravery, a sort of calm in the midst of a high adrenaline situation, right? If you've ever seen anybody ski jump, it's so terrifying to look at. I can't even imagine what it's like to do it. But the other thing that really, where sisu became international in the English-speaking world, where people started to notice it, was when it was on the front page of the New York Times after the Winter War. And the Winter War actually changed the whole situation around World War II. Because the Winter War started with the Soviet invasion of Finland in November 30th, 1939. And the Soviets invaded because Finland refused to give up some of the territory, in Russia, essentially. So, which has now become Russia anyway. But the Soviets invaded, the Red Army feared, everybody in the world saw this happening, right? And what everybody in the world agreed was about to happen was that Finland was going to become part of the Soviet Union, that they were going to be destroyed, because Finland had 300,000 soldiers, Soviet Union had 700,000 soldiers, so twice as many. Finland had 32 tanks. Soviet Union had up to 6,500 tanks. So a huge discrepancy. Soviet Union had 3,880 aircraft. Finland had 112. The Finns, universally, it's understood that they won because they had 70,000 casualties. Most of them were just injuries. So about 45,000 were injuries. Whereas the Soviets suffered 350,000 casualties, most of them deaths. Something like 250,000 of them were deaths. So like the world looked on as little tiny Finland took on mighty Soviet Union and basically won, even though technically the Soviet Union won. Everybody agreed that, oh my God, that the Finns weren't destroyed. They survived. So it's a kind of honey badger mentality. You could look at it as well. So here we're at this point, $28,000 later into Bitcoin, 11 years, is it 11 years, 12 years after the creation of Bitcoin, where the whole time people were saying, you can't go up against the mighty dollar. You can't go up against the financial system. You can't go up against the banks. You can't go up against these sovereign currencies and regulators and central banks. But we've done it, right? The whole time people said, you can't do it. The whole time we did the honey badger sisu thing, and we just kept going. We kept going forward.
Yeah, it's really impressive for sure. And many more $1,000 benchmarks to fall, as the sisu of money continues to push on against the fiat world.
But again, it's hard to describe until you see it, until you know it. And again, this is a mindset that you cultivate. It's not just luck. It's not just like hoping you survive the winter. It's actually having a plan. Like it's not just hoping you survive this invasion from Soviet Union. It's having a plan. It's having that calm and determination and approach to it. So when I look at the headlines in the Bitcoin space, when I look at what a $28,000 price is doing to, if you see this as a Soviets versus the Finns. So when you see like Nouriel Roubini absolutely lose his mind, overwrought with emotion because Bitcoin is hitting 28,000. He has no sisu. He's not in control. And what is the loser doing? What is the loser seeking? The loser is seeking violence. He's appealing to the government to do something, to stop these people, to stop Bitcoin, to violently go after their Bitcoin and crush the network. It's too late, right?
Yeah, that's what the surprising thing is about it. Whether it's Roubini, but more surprising also Peter Schiff. He's always asking the government to intercede and to stop the Bitcoin rising in price. And here's a guy who calls himself a libertarian, and he's always appealing to the government and begging the government, please, government, help me, help me. And, it's not going to work because as for all the reasons we've said, but yeah, I don't know. Roubini just seems like in meltdown phase. It has been for several years, and it's only going to get worse. So, where's this going to end for him? Because as they think Bitcoin keeps going higher, I mean, where does he think this is going to leave him?
Now, think of the mindset cultivated amongst those who have been orange pilled. What happens when China back in 2014 was saying they were going to crush Bitcoin? What happens when the Bitcoin price plunges by 80%? Do we appeal to the government? Do we appeal to anybody to help us? Do we hope that things get better and just sit back? No, what we do is not only do we keep building, but we whip out the memes, right? The memes help us. It's the narrative to get through this time. And it's hysterical. We laugh.
Yeah, the memes are powerful. It's a way to message and signal each other. that the battle is on. And the memes are powerful. Definitely Bitcoin's been driven by memes. And memes are the 21st century version of fill in the blank. I mean, I could go on a long tangent on that, but it's a very, very powerful situation.
So Bitcoin from the very beginning was that honey badger. It had the sisu. It took on the empire. It took on 5,000 years of history, by the way. It took on even gold, right? Like a lot of the libertarians at first were like, yeah, whatever, the regulators will crush you. And now the fever pitch of emotion is because it's actually taking on gold.
Yeah, I thought of a good metaphor for the previous sentence where I left it blank. It would be gunpowder. It's the gunpowder of the 21st century. So that was the invention that changed everything. And so, yeah, it's one of those types of things. It just changes everything instantaneously. And the memes are driving the community, and the community drives the Bitcoin. And there's so many things going on. And the game theory is so evenly balanced. And it's such a beautiful Sistine Chapel of money. And the sisu that we see in Finland, I think it's a good precursor to what we can expect. The ultimate triumph.
Yeah, and again, this sisu is, as the Wikipedia points out, to elaborate on the function of sisu, it is a powerful psychological potential which enables the individual to tap into mental strength beyond their preconceived resources. Finland may have the initial monopoly on sisu as a cultural construct, but it is a universal capacity, and the potential for it exists within all individuals. So it's the transformative power of narrative.
It's the Superman pill. Orange pill, the Superman pill, the sisu pill, drop it, and you get orange pill tough. Bitcoin real. Beautiful.
Well, yeah. And it's like, it is a story that you have to tell yourself, because obviously anybody who survives, like there's a sort of innate quality to it, say in the Russians as well. So if you have winters that last 10 months long and you're going to die. Okay, remember, so this winter war, everybody, you should go to YouTube, look it up, winter war. There's a great documentary online about this. But what happened is, Stalin sent the Red Army up there. I don't think they were Russians. They were like Belarusian and Ukrainians. And he sent them up there. And what happened? Well, it was from November 30th through March 13th when they signed a peace treaty. But it went down to negative 43 degrees Celsius. That's negative 45 Fahrenheit. Mm-hmm. So here's the sort of people that have to survive those sort of winters. Like, remember that time in Montauk, when that teacher we ran into at the shop who lives out there year long, and all year through the winter. Very few people live in Montauk in the winter. And he was a fan of Kai's report. And we asked him what it's like out there in the winter. And he said, well, you need to have a plan.
Yeah, exactly. Because you could be cut off from food, et cetera. It's you're out there in the wilderness, and you do need to have a plan. I mean, that was the second he said that, you got a sense immediately of kind of what it was like to be during the winter. And yeah, from what I know about that war, I mean, the Finns were prepared. They fought, for example, in all white, which was not the case with the Soviets, and so the Soviets were relatively easy to pick off, and all kinds of things like that. They were able to survive out there. They had a great supply line of food that was coming from the rear guard,
Helsinki,
and they were just totally adapted to it. And well, we are in this fight, and you do have you still have a few holdouts like Rubini and others who are just defending their small turf against the uprising of Bitcoin, and they've become comical figures. I just think that it's every single argument put forth has been defeated by 5 years ago. They haven't even come up with any new arguments. It's just the same old thing over and over and over again. They're just hoping that the government comes in at the last minute to save them, and it's just not going to happen.
Now remember, so at that moment that this the Winter War had happened, and part of the reason why they won is, like he said, the supply line. They also had the second most famous successful sniper in history. after there was a Soviet woman who is the most famous in history. But then they had this famous sniper, and their snipers were amazing, and that's how they basically killed several 100,000 Soviet troops, is with snipers sitting in trees and in piles of snow. But this was right a few months after World War II had started. So the Nazis had already invaded Poland, and they were about to, in the next few months, at the end of this winter war, they were going to invade France and the Netherlands. But like the Allied powers, right? Britain, the United States didn't want to go to Europe, did not want to get involved in this situation of the Soviet Union starting to invade countries, and then the Nazis invading countries. And so when Hitler saw this, by the way, he took the wrong lesson. He didn't understand sisu and what had happened. What he saw was that he thought, oh, well, the Soviets are a lot weaker than I thought. So that altered the course of World War II, because while he was overrunning, he easily overran France and Netherlands, and the Brits thought they were next. What happened instead? He saw this and he thought it was his moment. If the little Finns could defeat the Soviets, he started Operation Barbarossa, and he's like, let's go to invade Stalingrad, right? So he sent there, and well, he met the Soviet snipers, and it was the beginning of the end, right? Maybe it might have been different had the Finns not defeated the Soviets, and he decided, therefore, if the Finns could beat them, obviously the Nazi army could beat them. Well, he was wrong.
Well, we're in one of those century-defining moments again. It's Bitcoin versus all the global central banks. And, we've got what they don't have, and that is absolute scarcity. And they're trying to print their way out of their problems, which only makes it worse. So it's, I'm loving our odds right here. And Rubini is like that guy in Baghdad Bob, who kept saying, oh, yeah, Saddam's winning and Iraq's winning. General Norman Schwarzkopf was rolling over Iraq in like 20 minutes with several battalions of tanks. And, but he would get on TV a lot and say, Bob Dad Bag, we're winning. And that's Rubini thinks he's, in a foxhole somewhere claiming he's winning this war against Bitcoin. And he's just getting rolled over.
Yeah. And well, the Operation Barbarossa equivalent in the sisu world is that, okay, the central banks think that all they need to do is create these CBDCs and they can compete with Bitcoin, because they misunderstand the honey badger nature of it. They misunderstand sisu. They think it's something else, and that they could just recreate it and use their force, that they're the mighty Red Army, or they're the mighty, German army. So,
well, it's a continuation of the state, right? A central bank digital currency is still state run, whereas Bitcoin is a separation of state and money, which is the first time ever in history that's ever happened. And the power of that is overwhelming, and it's transforming humanity as we know it. So the central banks, they say, oh, we're going to create our own state-controlled digital bank currency, right? And they don't, I mean, the good news is that if they really understood Bitcoin, they would all quit and start buying, stacking sats if they understood it. But since they don't, that means that there's still a huge way to go for Bitcoin on the upside.
One of the defining sisu moments in Bitcoin's history was 2017 and the fork wars. And on one side were all the equivalent of the Soviet Union, the mighty Red Army, the most powerful. Like I said, we had 32 tanks in Finland versus 6,500 on the Soviet side. So we had that equivalent on the battlefields of the fork wars. We had the billionaires, we had the big guys, we had all the OGs, the whales, right, on one side, and we had the minnows of the users on the other side. And the users won. The user activated soft fork happened, and we won. The minnows won. Now, when I talk about these World War II things, and certain moments that alter the outcome of all of our history, the same thing here, because I was there's a private, WhatsApp group that I'm a part of. And if it weren't private, I would screen grab this and show you this, but Roger Ver was in there just the day that Bitcoin hit $28,000. And he was bragging about how Bitcoin Cash is now accepted at 75 shops in Antigua.
Right. Well, this brings out the idea of being too bullish on Bitcoin, right? So you're either not enough bullish, or you can be too bullish. So like there's a lot of examples of people who got too bullish, and they got so bullish that they tried to compete with Bitcoin, or they tried to master Bitcoin in a way that was not within their means. And a lot of them went to jail, or they're facing jail. There's a whole group of folks that got really too bullish and wildly reckless and really lawless. Roger got too bullish on Bitcoin, and he tried to fork it off, and now it's hitting new all-time lows, and that was a huge catastrophe. The Satoshi Vision fork, that's a huge catastrophe, hitting new all-time lows against Bitcoin. That was too bullish, right? So to stay on the path, it's very spiritual. A lot of times you see in Bitcoin now a lot of the spiritual talk from people writing about the philosophical quantity. If you go back and you study philosophy and spiritualism and kind of, even Buddhism, this idea of staying on the path, right? The way, and that there is a vector of Bitcoin that you stay on. If you get on it, if you get off it, either you're not bullish enough or you're too bullish. And either way is bad. You have to stay on the vector. Stay on the vector.
Well, with that, we're going to throw to our interview with Safe Dina Moose. But I do want to say, that the point about the Roger Ver thing and him bragging about 75 shops in Antigua is like but for the grace of the user activated soft fork goes Bitcoin. We're not, we would be talking about tiki huts in Antigua accepting Bitcoin. And that was like that's like the most we have to achieve. Whereas we're like not only replacing a base monetary metal of gold after 5,000 years. We're replacing like mindsets, a whole way of thinking.
Yeah.
Like we're altering the outcome of history in a positive way, away from the fiat dark ages and to a Bitcoin enlightenment. So I think, with that, let's go to our professor, Safe Dina Moose.
Yeah, Safe Dina Moose. All righty, time now to turn to Dr. Safe Dina Moose. Everyone in the audience knows him as the author of this instant classic, The Bitcoin Standard. Personally, this copy is autographed to me from the author, and it says right here, mentions that Bitcoin about a better world. A better world is possible. Exactly right, Safe Dina Moose. Now, the book is also, we got the companion piece out, the Fiat Standard, which you can find at safedeen.com. The book is not only quite timely for 2021, as we see the U.S. dollar celebrate its 50th anniversary, but I think quite interesting for our audience, as Orange Pill likes to look at history, art, and culture and society to understand where we are today, Stacy.
Right. Safedeen, your book is being published, the Fiat Standard, on your site, safedeen.com, kind of as a course. So I feel like we're going to be graded for our questions here, whether or not we read the book and understand it. But what I have to ask for you is, so I'm going to summarize the book from what I understand and kind of picking up a few of your phrases from the book. The Fiat Standard was a series of temporary measures. They were supposed to be temporary. Each measure a response to the problems inherent to the gold standard, and born out of a need to default on debts. So elaborate on this.
Yeah, this is basically, this is kind of the summation of the whole of chapter 2 that you see starting from 1914 when England went into the war, all the way up until 1971. Every single progression in the move away from gold was always temporary, and it was always just an emergency. And, we're going to get back to normal and everything's going to be all right. And then instead, it continued to move away in the opposite direction, away from a gold standard into fiat. And effectively, it was how governments defaulted. I think the way to understand the fiat system is that it's kind of the botched abortion of the default of governments who commit to war with resources and gold that they didn't have. And so they figured the only way that we could I mean, essentially, there was nobody to take all of these governments into receivership at the same time, since they were all bankrupt, and effectively, they were bankrupt to their own descendants, and their own descendants weren't there to take them to court and liquidate them and bring in new management. And so they essentially took over the money payment system and used it and dumped their default bags on it, essentially. And then from then on, we've had this entire 20th century story of governments monopolizing banking and international banking, so international correspondence banking, as well as savings. You have to save in the same shitty fiat token that runs the payment network that they use and also backs the currency that they issue. And that's really the fiat standard, that you have to use this currency that they are constantly borrowing against. You have to put all of your family and all of your wealth and all of your money and all of your capital constantly up there as collateral for your government. You have no other choice.
Well, right. So the gold standard, you have tremendous wealth being built up, and then there's a switch over to a fiat standard, and the ancestors who built that wealth are going to see their wealth destroyed, but they're not around to answer anymore. The children of these folks, the grandchildren, destroy it all essentially with fiat money. But you make a very interesting connection between fiat money and war. So 1914, of course, went off the gold standard, and we went into World War I. In 1971, America couldn't afford the Vietnam War anymore, so it closed the gold window and issued a lot of fiat money under Nixon. Paul Krugman over the New York Times, Nobel winning economist at the New York Times, says in his column that the U.S. dollar is backed with men by guns. So there's this direct correlation between fiat money and violence, and would kind of make us believe that gold is a certain limiting property on a war, because if you run out of gold, you have to stop the war. And that was the way it was and has been throughout history. And the invention of fiat money allowed war to continue past its financial point of no return. But then with Bitcoin now, it's not only hard money like war, so gold that limits war, but it actually transfers sovereignty away from the centralized authorities that might even start a war. So that's a very interesting moment in the history of peace, Safety.
It absolutely is. It's insane. It really is insane when you think about just what a neat technological engineering solution it is to the problem of endless war. Because the century of fiat was the century of war, and it's not a coincidence. If you look at wars under the gold standard, generals were very careful about not wasting soldiers needlessly, and kings were very careful about that too, because they knew that if they ran out of gold, that's it, they're out of gold, and then anybody can attack them and they won't be able to pay soldiers, and then they're gone. And so you have to be careful about it. But with the fiat standard, there's just always an extra layer where instead of just these corrupt leaders or bad leaders, instead of them just defaulting by running out of gold, it's like you give them another 10, 20, 30-year lease of life by allowing them to be parasites on the entire accumulated capital of society, because everybody's capital is stored in a bank account, because you can't just hold gold under your mattress, because that's not very saleable across space. You can't send it, you can't use it for payments day to day. So you have to put most of your money in the financial system. And then if it's in the financial system, well, then it allows a defaulted government to continue to borrow based on the premise that it can still devalue the currency. And essentially it can finance itself from the savings of its citizens. And so, of course, the end result is the same. If they get to, if they ran out of their own money, they are also going to run out of your money. There's no question about it. So you're only delaying the inevitable by a decade or two, or a century or two, I think. But and you're causing so much more economic damage, because in an orderly world in which fiat wouldn't be the monetary system, and in which they had to use gold or Bitcoin or some form of hard money that governments, all of them, cannot print. As soon as a government gets into the point where it's not being very profitable, it becomes more profitable for people to overthrow it, and it gets overthrown. You can imagine it being far less messy of a process than the endless wars that we see simmer in the 20th century, because there's always an infinite amount of financing ready for whoever takes over the government. And so when the economy goes bad, everybody wants to be in charge of the government, and everybody's fighting about it, and it becomes a matter of life and death, and it can be financed by it. So the neat solution here is that Bitcoin allows us to have wealth that is saleable across time, meaning that you can save the value in it for the future, but also saleable across space. So just because it's like gold in that it's saleable across time, and even better than gold because it has NGU technology, number go up technology, but also it's saleable across space, even better than fiat, because you can send it across international borders, and it would achieve, final settlement depending on how many transactions how many confirmations you want to wait for, but 1 hour or 10 hours or whatever it is, much faster than having to run through central banks and going through governments and legal and judicial systems. So it's it allows just so much wealth to not be pillaged by warlords around the world, that if you like not seeing people get killed all over the world, you probably would appreciate, I think.
Right. You mentioned that when we first went off the gold standard, when these nations went broke because of World War I, it was like they were in debt to future generations. And of course, Paul Krugman also said that debt is just money we owe to ourselves. And so we could write infinite amounts of debt. He also said, as Max pointed out, that fiat, he says, is better than Bitcoin because Bitcoin is not backed by men with guns. So he believes that having your currency backed by men with guns is a good thing. Now, if when I look at it, when I think of what he said about that, what Bitcoin is backed by is men and women with nodes, asics, and private keys. Like there's no violence in there. So
yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
And the actual genesis, as you lay out in your course of the Fiat Standard, is that, those three pivotal moments really in the Fiat Standard, August of 1915, when the Bank of England, the United Kingdom, seized its citizens' gold. Essentially, it confiscated it through propaganda, perhaps maybe not as violently as what the U.S. did with Executive Order 6102. But, it was always the actual birth of it was an act of violence. Nevertheless, you're kind of sympathetic or have a little bit of empathy, by your standards anyway, for these the fiat money pushers. Like, what if they didn't seize the citizens' gold? Like, what would have happened? Where would we be today?
I don't know what. I don't really know World War I enough to know what would have happened. But I think, ultimately all World War I combatants took the money of their people and used it to fight the war. And so you could argue that it cancels each other out. And you could argue that the other aspect of it is that the country that came out ahead of World War I, the country that was to become the world leader after World War I, was the US. And that was because it was the one that went off the gold standard the latest. It was only in 1917 that the US went off the gold standard. So initially in 1914, when the Fed was established, it was still on the gold standard. And then in 1917, when it went into the war, that's when de facto it suspended the gold standard. But it would return to the gold standard in, I mentioned it in the book, I think it was 22 or 23. They would get back on the gold standard. So in some sense, I think the short-termist view of this is, well, you devalue your people's citizenship, your citizens' money, and then you win the war. The Keynesian genius, bloodthirsty idiots exclaim with joy. But in reality, it really ends up being that the countries that end up winning the war are the ones that maintain their currencies over the long run much better, because their money is better, their money is more trustworthy. And in fact, that ends up meaning that in times of war and conflict, they would be likely to attract capital. So a big part of the problem with fiat was that a lot of the money in Europe moved to the US because Europeans were busy fighting with each other. and people feared that it would get devalued. And that was really what was driving much of the gold shortage in Europe, because at the time they were printing, people started to take their gold to the US. So um, it's hard to disentangle, how, when you would draw the line if you wanted to run a counterfactual to it. But if we say that, arguably, I would say, my guess would be, if you had some kind of technological solution that made going off the gold standard impossible back in 1914, probably, the conflict would have been resolved between Serbia and Austria. Maybe Germany would have entered, maybe a couple of others. And even if it had been all of the great powers entering it, I think it would have been settled much earlier. Now, who would have won what ultimately doesn't even matter. If you look at the map of the world before and after World War I and World War II, it's not that pressing. Like, Austrians continued to live in Austria and Germans continued to live in Germany, and there wasn't that much territorial change. It was just that they could continue to fight with each other. So I think, maybe it would have been a short war, maybe it would have ended very quickly, and then we would have gone back on a gold standard. And what's amazing is to think, if we had continued with the kind of economic system before 1914, continued with it, and then with the technologies that were invented before 1914, which, that technology did come to age in the 20th century, but it came to age at a time when we were using this kind of semi-barter monetary system of fiat, which loses value and has inflation, has all these problems. I think, we'd be maybe 50 years ahead, maybe 100 years ahead, technologically speaking, if we had gold over the last 20th century.
Yeah, thinking about this 1914 period, of course, it came not too long after the Industrial Revolution. And that required the invention of the industrial production of fiat money, almost, you could say, to feed the capital markets, which were burgeoning at that time, and globalization was happening. And these two things reinforced each other, and you had the social contract that had come along about 100 years earlier challenged, because suddenly the state was able to amass capital through their defense expenditures. And we talk about in the U.S. the military industrial complex, and how the industrialization of the military have become this albatross, the deep state, as it's known in the U.S. And so the social contract, which was talked about back in the 1700s by John Locke, this delicate balance between the governed and the government, and how do you manage that? It got completely lopsided, and people began to understand this in the 60s and 70s, in particular in America, because we felt like our rights were being challenged, and we had a lot of civil rights movements. But my question is that with Bitcoin, even the whole industrial model is shifting to the individual with the help of 3D printing, online access to anything you need, the cottage industries, cottage content producers, music producers, P2P file swapping. Like, the Industrial Revolution has now been overturned by the sovereign individual. Money has been separated from the state. And so the social contract is undergoing a revolution here, that in a way that we haven't seen in 300 years. With Bitcoin at enabling this whole thing. And the big losers are going to be the state and the central banks. What are we going to look for in 2021? Are they just going to roll over and basically give up, or are they going to try to cling to power even though it's impossible? Safety.
I think no. I think there's still a lot of trump cards they can play. It's easy to underestimate the fiat monster, but it's not impossible for it to continue to carry on for another 5, 10, maybe 50 years. Who knows? I think the next stage now. So now you look at it. Basically the vast majority of governments around the world are in a very precarious fiscal position, particularly by the end of 2020. Everybody's got terrible budget deficits and growing debt, and the same toxic cocktail is brewing all over the world. However, Again, what I think they could do right now is we can have a new Bretton Woods moment, and you already see the international organizations mention this. And I think there's still scope for some new Treaty of Genoa / Bretton Woods, where they all get together. And if you look at the kind of world order today, it does seem quite amicable in general. There's coronavirus happens, everybody goes along and wears the same masks and stays in home. And so if you believe in international harmony and cooperation, I guess this kind of pretends well. And I think there's some room to strike a bargain now with China essentially being the only, or having essentially the only healthy, semi-healthy balance sheet left by the end of 2020. And because it has a lot of savings, potentially, I think what we could see is a creation of a new central bank digital currency, SDR kind of thing. So a new, maybe a digital SDR, something like that, which is used as central bank reserve currency and administered by the IMF or something like that, or the World Bank or whatever. And I think, there's scope for essentially introducing this as a kind of a solution wherein the share of global reserves that accrues to China increases. I think this is really where the bargain can be struck. So currently, the US has about 50% of global reserve, 51%. The euro is about 17, gold is about 15, and then various other insignificant fiat coins are under 5%. So I think, the yuan is currently at only 1.7. So there's scope for increasing the size of the yuan in the global reserve currency pool by introducing a new currency that is part yuan, part US dollar, part euro, maybe even part gold, who knows. But I think there's something to be done around that for a while. Because Bitcoin needs time to eat the world. So I think that they can still pull something like this off. And of course, it would be quite convenient for Bitcoin because it would, it would be the best advertisement for Bitcoin because look, here's a shitcoin that has very high inflation and is controlled by all the world's governments together. And nobody knows how much of it exists and nobody knows if you can keep it and they can take it at any point in time. Or you can have Bitcoin with its unique and proprietary number go up technology, and its complete decentralized nature where nobody controls it.
Well, I want to pick up on that decentralization of the Bitcoin network because let's look at how you teach this course on the Fiat Standard is for Bitcoiners. You explain the Fiat Standard using a lot of the terms from the Bitcoin world. So you have the Fed as the node operator, essentially. They're the equivalent of the nodes. Lending is like the miner. But, it really stands out to me reading the chapters so far available on Fiat Standard is not only that the Fiat Standard was born out of violence and default, but that it really centralized the system. Because, in the gold standard, there were a lot of goldsmiths. There were all sorts of wealthy people with lots of gold. And kings would often have to go to the wealthy citizens and ask them for gold and convince them. They had to sell them on the war, why this war was a good idea, give them more gold. Now, no permission is needed at all, right? They could just print at will and issue credit at will. So go over this, the central bank, because if we're going to have these central bank currencies, the central bank as the node operator.
Yeah, I think if you want to think about it in terms of Bitcoin, we have several kinds of nodes in the fiat system. It's not a peer-to-peer system where we only have one kind of node and they're all peers with equal rights and obligations in the network and privileges. No, we only have one full node effectively, which is the Federal Reserve. And effectively the Federal Reserve, it can create money at will and it can confiscate or give money at will. So it's like having one full node on the Bitcoin network and then having all the other nodes just copy its blockchain. So imagine if you had the one Bitcoin full node and you could do anything with it, and you could just decide you take my coins, or you could just decide I'm not part of the network anymore, that my coins don't work on the network. You could revoke my private keys effectively. This is kind of how fiat works in terms of a network. But you're absolutely correct in that it is centralizing, and effectively it makes economic value. And this is the focus of the second part of the book, which I haven't published yet. It's coming in the next few weeks. It changes the whole conception of economic value in society from being about producing things that get people to pay you money because it's hard, honest money, versus um, value as being something that is essentially decided by government fiat. Government says this is X, therefore this is X. Government could point at a bunch of industrial waste like soy sludge and call this food, and then it becomes food. And then you have entire nutrition departments that convince people that you should eat this, and you have an entire industry that springs around that tries to make this edible for people, and they push it with all kinds of weight because they decree that this is food. And it completely overpowers the process of the free market. And I think it's you hear Bitcoiners say this, but it to an extent it's very true that you just can't have a free market if you have fiat money, because the whole point about fiat market, the whole reason which you can have the only way that you can have a free market exist is when individuals on the market own capital and are able to make economic calculation with their capital. But if economic calculation is essentially conducted in Stephanie Kelton's funny scoreboard, where it's like that Drew Carey show, what do they call it, where the points don't matter, the lines are made up and the points don't matter.
I haven't seen that.
Whose line is it anyway?
I haven't seen Drew.
Whose line is it anyway?
Okay.
Yeah, whose line is it anyway? That's essentially what an economy is, what a fiat economy is. Everything is just made up on the spot, and government can intervene. So in the second part of the book, I discuss many of those aspects of life and how much it is distorting in a quite harmful way. And and I think interestingly, and in gold, you don't find this kind of centralization, because when it was gold coin, people from all over the world could make gold coins and they could sell them everywhere because anybody could test it and verify it with several ways. And there were for instance, the Byzantine solidus, which later became the Islamic dinar. These kind of coins existed for many thousands of years with similar weight and similar value, and were well known, and people have religious scripture written in terms of these units of account that have held up for hundreds and thousands of years. And anybody could make this coin, and anybody could accept it, and anybody could verify it. It was far more decentralized. But with the fiat system, it was really bringing, as you said, the industrial efficiency of industrialization to the process of money in a way that was quite suffocating of the free market process, and suffocating of its growth, I think.
Right. The industrialization, we had the development of the, quote, external costs. So the environmental considerations were not factored into the costs. And that crowded out a lot of the civil society's open space and the public domain and things like that. But I want to talk a little bit about hard money itself and the idea of money, because it gives people hope. Why would anyone save money unless they hoped for a better tomorrow? Why do people save money at all? Because they're thinking about the next day. Entrepreneurs are thinking about a business in the future. Parents are thinking about their kids' education. They're thinking in the future. As you point out in the Bitcoin Standard, it's the high time preference versus low time preference. And I've said about the Bitcoin Standard, it's really 3 books. It's a book about the history of money. It's a book about Bitcoin. And it's a book about high time preference versus low time preference as a philosophical conceit, which is, I think, extremely important to consider. So with gold, as we're saying in this discussion, it has high time preference value. You can save it, and you can spend it in the future, and that's hopeful. But it also can be confiscated, and it also can be overly concentrated by the state, and it also can be market abused with derivatives, as we know is going on. But with Bitcoin, you remove all that, and you have nothing but pure hope. You can take it with you into the future. It can't be confiscated. It's deflationary. So what's left, and I'm just more of a philosophical question, if you blow away all the doubt and fear and you're left with only hope, Isn't that kind of a major transition for humanity? As even Paul Tudor Jones has said, he thinks Bitcoin is pro-humanity. Are we getting into something here that makes some monetary historical sense, or is this pure philosophical conjecture? What do you think, Safety?
No, I think so. I entirely agree with you. I think if you look at, there's an interesting study called History of Interest Rates by Homer and Scylla. And it goes through 5,000 years of human history and looks at data on interest rates across the world from all over the world. And you see there was always a distinct negative trend in the long term with interest rates. Interest rates have constantly been going down. And that makes sense from an Austrian economics perspective, because as humanity continues to accumulate more capital, as we develop technologically, as we advance our standard of living, we're able to afford more capital, and we're able to make capital more available for entrepreneurs. In other words, we're able to make interest rates lower and lower. And it's interesting because by 1914, by the early 20th century, interest rates had gotten to the point where they were at around 2% in England. And I've wondered, and then of course, what happened was with the move toward fiat money, you see that interest rates started rising back in 1914 and continued to rise all the way up until the 1970s and 80s, at which point they started dropping again. And now they're back at zero, roughly. But since 1914, obviously interest rates have increased, but also interest rates have become massively distorted because they're no longer real interest rates in a sense of being provided on the market. They are determined by central banks largely, and they are objects of policy, and they can be manipulated by, essentially manipulating the yield curve, and it stops being as accurate of a signal. But I've always wondered what would have happened if, as we were saying earlier, what would have happened if we didn't have a world war that went on for so long, and if we didn't have fiat money, if we didn't have all of that, and if the war just was some conflict that lasted 6 months or 3 months in Central Europe, and then life went on afterward. If this was the case, would have been interesting to see how this kind of monetary system would have developed. And I think I would posit to say that I would imagine that with a few more decades under the gold standard, or as we would see in a Bitcoin-based economy, eventually you would get a 0% interest rate. I think we would get to a point where interest rates decline so much, time preference drops so much. Because from the Austrian perspective, I should have mentioned that interest rates are a reflection of time preference, and so as we accumulate more capital, time preference drops, and with that, interest rates drop. I think there is time preference will never be zero, but it can drop to being close enough to zero that it is effectively it becomes effectively zero on the market, and essentially, I think what we would see is that in that kind of world, people would only have two kinds of financial products, which is essentially deposit banking and equity investment. I can't see the case for fixed interest rate lending when you don't have anybody with a printer and you don't have anybody who controls the payment rails who can effectively do some hocus pocus that works like a printer, because you can't guarantee anybody any particular returns, and you can't guarantee protection from loss. And so I imagine that the only kind of investment that would exist in that kind of place would be effectively equity investment. Or you would give people money to put it on deposit, and then you would pay them to keep it available for you. Or they would give it to people who take risk with it, and then you bear the risk on the downside and on the upside. I think a majority of people just need to put their money in saving, and a majority of money needs to be in saving. And if you look at financial markets today, if you ask anybody, would you substitute whatever you have? How much of your portfolio would you substitute for a financial asset that appreciates at 1 or 2% every year, let's say? And I think you would get somewhere around 50% of all financial assets, maybe 40, maybe 60, maybe 70, but somewhere in that range. Most people would be happy to take 1 or 2% in real terms every year, reliably over the long run on a very big chunk of their portfolio. So I think you'd have a big chunk of that in saving, where people just keep the money in saving, and that's it. It's all locked up in private keys, and it's stored for the future. And I think this would be quite a big thing, as you say.
And so is missing from your historical analysis really the school of thought of monetarism? We saw with Milton Friedman in the 80s and the deregulatory environment of Thatcher and Reagan. When you're talking about interest rates there, I'm thinking about when I was a stockbroker in the 80s. We were all into monetarism, and we tracked money supply figures very closely every month. And it was not Keynesianism. It was this new school where interest rates and manipulating the interest rate curve was how the economy was managed. But what I'm getting from what you're saying here is that it's ultimately as bogus as trying to just say that debt is only something we owe ourselves. In other words, it didn't really carry us into a nirvana economically, because we had these enormous crashes in the market due to the over financialization and the worshiping of interest rates. So, didn't interest rates for about 20 years there become the mantra that was going to guide us to perpetual, prosperity? But that too kind of crashed on the rocks and didn't work. That's my first question. My second question is, with Austrian economics, up until Bitcoin, it was always a theory. But with Bitcoin, it's actually a practice. Is that true? Is that a true statement? It seems that until you separate the state from money, you could never actually try to do Austrian economics. It was something that was just a theoretical school, but now it's actually happening. So your comments on those 2 points.
So on interest rates, in a world of hard money, if you have low interest rates, that means you have very large amounts of savings. In a world of government fiat money, if you have low interest rates, that means you have somebody in a position somewhere who decided you have interest rates. It tells you nothing about the amount of savings that you have in real terms. So as such, we've seen interest rates drop under the fiat system, but the way in which they drop is not because of the increased availability of capital. It's because essentially you're borrowing at the expense of the future, and that borrowing is manifesting through inflation that appears in the long run for all currency holders, and happens in all assets, particularly scarce assets. So the monetarist dream is unfortunately, the monetarists don't apply the critical lens which they would usually apply to regular thinking about market interventions and government policies. They just don't apply that to money. In their perspective, in terms of money, it's money needs to be centrally planned. The government needs to be out there and making sure that the money goes by this rule or that rule.
Right, that was my point. They were just they saw things as central planning as the Keynesians, but they did so through interest rates. That was my point. And then
and they justify it by trying to pretend that at least we're not Keynesians and we're preventing the Keynesians. And to be fair, let's be fair. Given the choice, if you were going to pick a place over the last 100 years, you were going to be born in a place. Would you rather live in a place that's going to have 50 years of Keynesians in charge of monetary policy, or would you rather have the Chicago monetarists in charge of your monetary policy? I would still go with the Chicago monetarists. You'll still get inflation. It won't be ideal, but it's much better than the Keynesians.
And what was the second point?
Yeah, then as far as Austrian school, it seems like we can actually have an Austrian economics. So for the audience who might not, can you summarize Austrian economics in a couple of sentences and then say, what Bitcoin makes it possible? Or is that not that possible? Or what do you think? Is it possible to summarize it?
Basically, Austrian economics is what economics would be like without the silly hocus pocus of the Keynesians, which is essentially just a bunch of confusion that wastes people's time at university, where they receive a whole bunch of nonsense and try and make sense of it and fail and think, economics must be really difficult. Well, economics is not really difficult. It's just that economics at universities is largely Keynesian nonsense. So the Austrian school differs primarily from the mainstream schools in that it conceives of value as being subjective. And so immediately off the bat, you understand that value exists only in people's consciousness, and that everything in economics needs to be understood, all value in economics needs to be understood as subjective, which
Right.
immediately...
So sorry to cut in, but isn't it then possible to say one of the benefits of Bitcoin is that it has no utility other than to be pure money? Because in other words, like silver, they say, oh, it's closer to money because it has utility. But that's actually a drawback for silver, because then you've got price discovery based on its industrial use. Same thing for gold. Gold's got, quote, value in electronics, et cetera, but that's not pure subjective valuing. Then you have a market for it. Bitcoin, it only has one purpose, and that is to be a pure savings mechanism. And therefore, it's purely subjective, and therefore, it's Austrian economics.
Well, the value of gold and silver in jewelry and electricity is also subjective. All value is subjective. So there isn't a distinction in terms of all of it is subjective value. I think there is the conception of value as being objective or subjective is not really essential to Bitcoin. It's what I object to and how you've specified this is it's as if Bitcoin is a test of this. And I don't think that is the case. And I don't think that Austrian economics was kind of useless before Bitcoin. Austrian economics is just a way of understanding economics. It's a method of thinking about economics, which is the summation of many hundreds of years and many traditions and many scholars from all over the world reading each other and coming up with different perspectives. This is essentially just a way of approaching and thinking systematically about questions. It's not so much a testable hypothesis about economics. And so in this regard, I think what is really interesting about money in particular, about Bitcoin in particular, is that it is a test of the proposition in Austrian economics that Mises and Rothbard make, which is that the quantity of money itself does not matter. Money is not a good that is acquired for its quantity, and any quantity of money is enough. And Bitcoin is a living embodiment of this. So that's what's really very interesting about it, because according to all other schools of economics, there is some kind of superstitious reason, and they have some kind of superstitious math where they want to explain to you why this necessitates that we need to make more money. There's always a story and there's always a bunch of math, and the answer is we need to make more money.
So I have a follow-up to this, because you were mentioning subjective value and things like that. I want to talk about an objective reality that we could all see. The United States is the empire of fiat currency, of the Fiat Standard. And one could see, everybody could see, that 2/3 of the population is overweight. About 40% are obese. 20% are morbidly obese. It just seems like if this is the image of a fiat empire versus, say, the Roman Empire and all that they left behind, or Florence and the amazing art that they were able to create and inventions and discoveries made during a time of the Florin, like that there's something that's obviously not, that just visually you would say, I don't want that system, whatever causes that.
Yeah, I think there's something there, because the fiat system is like the late period of the Roman Empire, where they were already getting into inflation, and it was bread and circus, and things weren't very good. But with harder money, you see that people have much more of an incentive to think about the long run. I think this is really the difference. Ultimately, if you're able to have security financially, in that you know that you can expect that your savings can appreciate over time, I think if everybody is able to have this, I think we were saying this earlier, if you went to people and told them you can replace a part of your portfolio with something that yields regularly 1 or 2% reliably, and it's a rock, it's always going to have its value, nobody can print it for free. Most people would exchange that for this, because the amount of security that provides you, that you worked today, you're able to make a lot of money today, and you're able to store that money away, and you know that you will always have it 10, 20 years down the line, you'll always have this. This is really something that I think changes the entire psyche of a human being. It's quite amazing, and I think you see it with Bitcoiners on Twitter, and when in Bitcoin conferences, everybody has stories about just how Bitcoin makes this change in you individually, because you've suddenly and Mises can help us understand this. But Mises says, the only reason people acquire money is because of uncertainty of the future. If there was no uncertainty about the future, if you knew the future with complete certainty, you wouldn't need to hold any money. You would make it so that you would sell all of your investments exactly at the moment that you need to make the spending that you need to make, and so you wouldn't have to hold the money. So you effectively, you liquidate your stocks and make the payment directly to your to the person you're buying it from. If you had everything planned and there was no uncertainty about the future, there would be no reason to hold money. But there is uncertainty about the future, and there's enormous uncertainty about the future, and money helps us alleviate that uncertainty. The more money we are able to secure for the future, and the more we have trust in the ability of this money to be there in the future, the more we are able to the less uncertainty we have about the future, and the more certainty we have in the future, and therefore the more we are likely to provide for the future, the more likely we are to think of the world in terms of, next year, next 10 years, next 20 years, next 50 years, what's the world going to be like? And effectively, human civilization is the process of lowering our time preference, lengthening our time horizon, accumulating more capital. And I think, you could add to those things also, it's the process of hardening our money. We're constantly putting all kinds of things into use as money, and through thousands of years of natural market competition, they are getting weeded out. The bad things are not getting used as money, and the better things are getting used. So nobody uses copper anymore as money. Nobody except you guys uses silver as money anymore, but everybody else is over it. Soon enough, there won't be anybody using gold anymore, maybe, potentially. But, the process of moving from copper to silver to gold was the process of moving toward harder and harder money. And by the early 20th century, by the end of the 19th century, everybody was already on the gold standard, and everybody had moved to gold as the hardest money. And so that means that people had harder money. So people had better savings technology. We've always been trying to save, and we're always trying to use everything we find as a saving technology. And through the brutal competition of markets, and through learning from one another, and through copying one another, we'd arrived at gold as the best solution by the early 20th century. And now we've, as I think you would agree, we've 100x or 1000x the gold solution in terms of money by introducing Bitcoin. It's just a much, much harder and better money, and I think it's an inevitable technological leap forward.
You had said in your book, The Fiat Standard, that at its essence, the Fiat Standard destroys savings and planning for the future in order to operate a payments network, which is interesting because that can relate to what happened in 2017 and the Bitcoin, hard fork war.
Absolutely. I think it's effectively what the fiat system does is, because the government has a monopoly on the payment system, they can abuse the currency, and they can borrow against the currency, and they can issue bonds that are denominated in the currency, and effectively put people's savings at risk to finance their spending. And that's what's financed so much bad spending throughout the 20th century. And effectively, people seem to be under the illusion that this is the only way that you can run a payment system. We're not able to have international payments unless we have a central bank that manages an international cash account with foreign currencies, and also uses that to back the deposits in the bank, and also uses that to back the currency. No, these things can't be provided individually on the market. You can have banks that trade, and you can have saving banks, and they can be the same accounts, but your money for savings doesn't have to be related to international trade. People who trade can put their own capital into trade, and you can choose to be part of a bank that doesn't engage in foreign trade if you wanted to, and doesn't have foreign currency exchange risk. If we had a free market, we'd have all of these things being provided on the market, and there wouldn't be a problem with it. It's the fact that it is a monopoly that continuously makes it fail. And really, it's why Bitcoin is really the only answer. Because other than this, there's no way to run this monopoly correctly. Like it's where you see in the book, as you mentioned, there's a little bit of sympathy to the fiat system in that, like, you can sort of see how the motivation comes along. Like, if we just abuse the currency for a little bit, we can win the war against those evil foreigners. And you can understand how most people would sympathize with this. You don't need to muster an evil conspiracy to have this. And then you can see how, when they're trying to manage this thing in a democratic system, how it's just going to be an endless series of, kicking the can down the road, one person after the other, trying their best to kick the can down the road. But even if those people were well-meaning, and even if they were trying their best to do it well, there's just no way you can centrally plan a currency and centrally plan the value of the currency and centrally plan trade and centrally plan all of those things at the same time. There's no way you can successfully substitute for free market in those things. And there's no way that they can reform it, I think. Well, maybe there is, but I don't see the possibility for reform as being very strong. That's why I think really Bitcoin is the only alternative.
So, Safetine, as an educator, as a professor, as a writer in the education system, currently mired in debt, people graduating with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, of fiat money debt, your education, your Fiat Standard, which I guess people can sign up for, and they're getting the chapters delivered to them sequentially over time. It's the opposite, because everyone I know that wanted to get educated about Bitcoin for the last 10 years has got stinking rich. It's like the opposite of the regular education system that puts you into debt. When you go into a Bitcoin education system, you get rich. I mean, that's the difference between the Safe Dean University and Harvard. Harvard will put you into debt, and you end up being like Larry Summers, a poser for the establishment who makes garbage up for the Financial Times. You go to the Fiat Standard course, and you get your intellect massaged and expanded. At the same time, you got the number go up technology. You must be the most popular professor in the world, Safetine.
And you only pay $15 a month. Like, you go to Harvard, you're only watching Zoom calls anyway, and you're paying 70 whatever it is thousand fiat coins a month, a year on it. And at safedean.com, you pay $100 a month, and that's it. $100 a year or $15 a month, and that's it. And you get the chapters, and you get to read them as they're being written, and you get to discuss them on the forum, and you get to join the seminars. I think education is. And communication can be done so very cheaply. And over the last 50 years, as telecommunications has gotten cheaper, it could have been done so much cheaper than it has been done. But universities have absolutely no incentive for that, because they are fiat. They are part of the fiat system. They survive, they live and die by fiat money. They get their money from government, not from the consumers. Of course, they do charge extortionate fees, most of them, to students, but that's still not where they get their main money. Their main money comes from playing the fiat political system and getting loans and getting research grants. And
right. When I went to New York University, it was a real estate holding company. They're building dorm rooms where they squish hundreds of students into dorms at a much higher density than they could on a residential development. And that was basically NYU's game plan. It's a property development firm disguised as an education facility. And here you are, basically for $15 a month, people are getting one of the best educations. Not even Plato and Aristotle knew about Bitcoin. You're going to be smarter than those guys. I mean, you're going to be the smartest people in 3,000 years. But let me ask you this. So as you, obviously you're continuing to write about this. And so it's a bit of an intellectual journey that you are on, Safetine and Moose. Where are you really thinking about in terms of applying your research here at this moment into this phenomenon? Because it is a growing phenomenon. The final chapters have not been written on this. What's the bleeding edge right now? Where are you looking at it and just thinking like, wow, I got to dig deeper into this part of it, because this seems to be where the next wave of transformation is coming from?
I think the really interesting thing is to imagine Bitcoin. This is a meme that I've been trying to propagate for the last couple of years, which is to imagine the kind of peaceful takeover of Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin is just a simple monetary software upgrade, where maybe the fiat system doesn't have to collapse, and we don't have to continue to have we don't have to have a global Venezuela. we can all upgrade to Bitcoin effectively before the fiat system collapses. And I think maybe there's been a lot of doomsday speculation around Bitcoin from day one, that Bitcoin is going to rise because of hyperinflation and so on. And that's influenced by the fact that a lot of people that are into Bitcoin because they're worried about hyperinflation. But it might be that Bitcoin is the market solution for the problem of hyperinflation. It's the technological solution for this problem, like the market and the technology and Satoshi and the cryptography scholars over the year, and all those people have managed to develop an intellect and a technological achievement that can be utilized by anybody who's suffering from the fiat standard and its problems in a way that can make the move away from fiat standard not painful. We're just going to, as we're going to witness more and more people migrate toward the Bitcoin system, and every person who migrates will get to benefit from Bitcoin's number go up technology, because there's a limited number of Bitcoins, so it's not like the latecomers will lose, because there will still be a limited amount, and as economic value goes up, the value of the Bitcoins will continue to go up. So even if you think about it, even after how half the world's population has already moved to Bitcoin, there's still at least a 100% appreciation left in Bitcoin. You can still get into Bitcoin and still double your money. You still have 100% NGU left. Even after half the world's money and half the world's population, if we assume, went into Bitcoin, there's still a lot of NGU left. There's still a lot of potential for Bitcoin's price appreciation. And as we move toward a world in which none of all of these fiat distortions to the economy are taking place, where government is not wasting an enormous amount of people's saved capital in order to finance nutrition departments that are telling people to eat industrial waste, where government can't waste so much money on fighting needless wars. When you imagine all of that capital actually staying in the hands of the people who own it in the form of savings, and then them being able to deploy it as capital in the real world, it's quite amazing to think about the potential it has for us. We can really, I think, upgrade the economic operating system in a way that leads to a significant increase in global productivity, where it becomes normal and natural that the whole world has 5% appreciation, 5% productivity increase every year, maybe even 10% productivity increase every year.
Right. And this week we have a companion piece to this interview with Safedine, and that's with Nick Bhatia. And your ideas really complement each other quite well. And what emerges in our interview with him is that, Bitcoin is a revolution in base money and layer one money. And for 5,000 years, up until 2009, it's just been gold. And then all the instruments, the debt instruments and layer 2 and 3 and 4 sort of monies invented on top of that, due to the basically the problems in gold. As you said, fiat was born out of some of the inherent problems of gold. So if we remove that, in order to get to the fiat standard, as you mentioned, basically gold had to be confiscated to eliminate that as an alternative to the fiat system. But Bitcoin is unconfiscatable. So it's coming into a system, replacing a system that was born out of confiscation. So I think it's just, it could be one of these sort of John and Yoko sort of moments where, where they said war is over if you want it. So the same thing is now, it's like peace is here if you want it. Like Bitcoin's here, you can have it.
Yeah, and the amazing thing is we don't have to preach peace to people, because you don't need to rely on people's good side. You just need to appeal to their greed, and you can count on greed much more than you can count on their good side.
True.
It's a far more reliable human motivator. And this is the genius of Bitcoin. Like, come and join for the NGU technology. Number go up. It's better technology. It's better money. You may like war, you may like economic miscalculation, you may like economic destruction, but now you have to pay for it yourself. Now you
Exactly.
understand, the mere existence of Bitcoin, the fact that Bitcoin simply exists means that you choose to pay for those things, because now you can exit it. You don't like what they're doing with the dollar, you can exit the dollar. You choose to stay in the dollar. You choose to miss out on Bitcoin's number go up technology because you want to finance whatever it is that they're doing with the dollar. So since Bitcoin has been invented, even if you don't like Bitcoin, you're still making the choice. Before Bitcoin, you had no choice. You had to be stuck in your local monetary system. With Bitcoin, you have to actively make the choice to, you want to dedicate your saved purchasing power to to giving to subsidizing these terrible things that governments are doing.
Well, the website is safedean.com. And as you saw, he was pretty kind to us. He only laughed a little bit at my silver holdings.
Yeah, Dr. Safe Dean, if you're suffering from the pain of fiat money, he'll prescribe orange pills.
True.
And you'll feel a lot better. He's my doctor.
Good.
Now, you are my doctor, Max. Max and Stacy, both of you, I don't say this enough. I cannot be thankful enough for you guys, because very early on, you made me really understand Bitcoin very, very early on. So, no, you are
I
my
noticed
doctor.
that we were prominently not displayed in the acknowledgements in this book.
I know, and I told you will
Standard.
be in the second edition. There's a second edition coming soon. You will be in it, and I apologize for missing.
I might have to hit you with the money gun for that.
I do.
There, take that.
I do remember Max mentioning Bitcoin to you when we first met you in 2011 or 12 back then. So it was you're our teacher now. The teacher becomes the student.
Yeah, Dr. Safety Moose is my doctor. He's also my professor, and I enrolled in the course, the Fiat Money Standard, anxiously getting every chapter, which is delivered to my inbox, and I get to consult with my doctor. It's telemedicine. Telemedicine.
He hasn't committed you yet.
I haven't been committed. He hasn't recommended me for a lobotomy, right? So it's not like those other doctors.
Exactly.
They keep telling me, they strap me down, they fill me full of fiat drugs. They try to put that lobotomy in my head. I don't like that.
No.
I don't want that.
No. I will only commit you to a citadel where you will eat only a lot of very delicious meat. This is the only thing I describe other than orange.
This gets better and better.
All right.
This gets better and better. I love this school. I didn't learn this at NYU.
Okay. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Bye.
Right. Well, as always, that interview and the first half of the show and the second half of the show are brought to you by swanbitcoin.com.
You darn tootin', it's brought to you by swanbitcoin.com. It's the best on-ramp to Bitcoin. You need some Bitcoin? Get on the ramp. Get on the on-ramp. Don't hide behind the shadows. Use swanbitcoin.com/Max and get $10 free Bitcoin for registering. I mean, gee whiz, where are you going to find a deal like that? And they got the Insta Smash Buy, which is the easiest way to buy Bitcoin in the world and the cheapest. Best fees, cheap fees.
It's under 1%.
Yeah, it's cheap. Cheap. And better than Coinbase.
So,
better than anything else, really.
How happy are the people in Orange Pill Podcast Group because they were, smash buying with us back when Bitcoin first hit 20,000? We did a special microdose where we were like, yeah, let's smash buy. And this is the first time that Max and I had bought at over 20,000, and our cost basis went from $10 to $60 or something like that. And anyway, everybody's happy, right? We're all laughing now.
That's only going to be the case, every month going forward. It's just going to be like this. Smash buy, stack them sets. Smash buy, stack them sets. At Swan. That's what you got to do. All the good tunes are copyrighted, so I got to make up my new tunes, and they're not necessarily as good as the old tunes, but it'll work, Smash buy, smash that swan. Don't smash the swan, smash the stacks. Don't want to smash Swan. No. And
we have to find a way to work our Orange Pill lyrics into a song about swanbitcoin.com.
It's not a dog. It's not a pig. It's a swan to smash it big. Smash over at Swan. Get your Bitcoin, not your Juan. It's the best currency in the world. It's something that'll make you go whirl, whirl, whirl around the world on your Bitcoin. Get it now, 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 get it now. Smash, 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 smash. Swan, swan. Hello, I'm a swan. Hello, I am the swan of Swan Bitcoin. I like to get smashed. I like to get smashed on margaritas and smashed by myself because I'm a swan. I'm a swan. Hello, 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 hello.
That's a thing. Is a few things. The log line for this show, Orange Pill Podcast, is Sats, Margs, and Orange Pill. On the episode sponsored by Swan, it should be Smashed, Margs, and Orange Pill.
Gosh, on New Year's Eve, I'm going to get super smashed. And
Okay.
I'll probably end up buying like 100 billion sats. I don't care. What do I care?
Right. Well, that was a feature-length promo there for swanbitcoin.com. But I want to talk about the other currency that was mentioned from Professor Safety Moose when he mocked me relentlessly and remorselessly about owning silver. And I do own silver, and it's a bit of a sentimental value, but it relates to this message of the mindset of sisu, of despite the odds. And that's an important thing in sisus, right? No matter the overwhelming odds against you, you remain calm and you march forward and you have a plan, right? Well, the thing about silver is this is the beginning of my own conversion of a mind whereby I am not a victim of the central bank and our banking system. I am not passive and sitting back and waiting for them and crying about how powerful they are and the regulators are going to crush us and the banking system is going to collapse. Oh no, what are we going to do? When Max identified that JP Morgan, the biggest, most powerful bank in the world, you're doing
Who's that guy on Twitter? It's called Cat Bop.
Orange Coin Cat. Yeah. But
You see that one with Roger Ver?
No, yeah. When he was fighting with the cat, yeah, that guy. I think he's in our Orange Pill podcast group. But I want to say, like the mindset in terms of me, Stacy Herbert, and my mindset about taking on the banksters and taking on who seem super powerful. J.P. Morgan, the largest bank in the world, the most powerful bank in the world. The CEO is a billionaire who is always dropped as possibly a Treasury Secretary sort of guy. Well, we took on J.P. Morgan and we won. Some people think we lost, just like some people think just because the Soviet Union took territory in the Winter War that the Soviets won. But no, the Finns won. We won in our battle against JP Morgan. Not only did Max identify that they were over leveraged, they were precariously short on silver, more than existed silver in the world. So that therefore it was an asymmetric bet. 1 ounce of silver, which was only $14, $15 at the time, we drove it up to $50. We made the front page of the Financial Times. We forced JP Morgan to respond to our campaign in 2010, 2011. We forced them to respond to it, and we forced them to close their shorts. We forced them to buy silver. It was
a dress rehearsal for the speculative attack that Michael Saylor and his gang are launching against central banks. Because he's borrowing money at near zero to buy Bitcoin.
Yes.
And he's forcing them to go bankrupt. So when JP Morgan was incredibly short silver and opened themselves up to a speculative attack, we made that known with Crash JP Morgan buy silver. And yeah, the price got up to 50. And they had to really go to the government for permission to increase their derivatives book and increase their short sales. They went beyond what was legally possible, which of course they always go to the government and beg for mercy whenever they get into trouble. Blythe Masters, who orchestrated the whole thing, was fired. She ended up in London starting some kind of digital coin company that I think went bust. And JP Morgan then also got some other handouts and goodies from the government as well. Since they were over there, they were, for example, caught manipulating the price of gold and silver 10 years later. And
that's because of us.
Right.
That's because of us. Again,
Right.
You have to understand your power. When you win, you must declare it. You must recognize it. You must not see yourselves as losers. So many people see themselves as losers. That it's worth actually writing "Crash JP Morgan buy silver" on Twitter, because you can find the losers, and then you find the losers and block them, because you don't want losers in your life. You don't want them. Remember, it's all about the creating the narratives. Don't buy the narrative of being a loser, because people will think, well, Bitcoin, silver didn't go to $200, so you lost. It's like,
right. So I think that's a good point. That crash JP Morgan buy silver was a stepping stone to the speculative attack that now everyone recognizes is possible with Bitcoin, right? So that was a stepping stone. And before that, even when we were doing Karma Bank and Karma Bank Radio, that was the idea was, remember, financial activism, how to use capitalism against itself if activists were interested in getting a seat at the table. And then we did crash JP Morgan buy silver, and then Bitcoin came around, and it was, okay, it's the base layer money that can be transformed, and therefore everything on top of it, including the banks and central banks, would be disintermediated, would be washed out of existence. And that's where we are now. And now, as I've said back with crash JP Morgan buy silver and Karma Bank, if you can get the attention of the hedge fund industry to use their massive leverage to attack what you want them to attack, point them in the right direction, paint the target where you want them to attack, and they can successfully attack it, you've marshaled incredible forces. So the Bitcoin community brought in the Paul Tudor Jones and the Michael Saylors and 30 institutions, and that's growing exponentially. And they're all now looking at that target that the Bitcoin community painted, and they're dropping the speculative attack bombs onto the central banks and the banks, and that's why the price is going up, and that's why there's no top to the price of Bitcoin, because fiat money is now, after 300 years of experimentation, we are now leaving that era.
And again, like putting this into a sisu concept, Bitcoin went after the king. It went after gold. It went after U.S. treasuries. It didn't go after the tiki huts in Antigua. That's not what it was about. Max and Stacy, we started GIABO, Global Insurrection Against Banker Occupation. This was what first erupted in 2008, 2009, as people started rising up against the banker occupation that happened with the collapse. Bitcoin, of course, was born out of that. Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. That's part of the same thing. We didn't go after all the little banks, all those tiny banks around the world. We went after the king. We targeted the king, JP Morgan. We didn't go after the second-rate banks, even like Goldman Sachs or Lehman Brothers was able to collapse. JP Morgan was the king. So we went after there. And you could have that mindset. And look at what Kevin O'Leary, I don't know, some guy was interviewed on CNBC. Bitcoin is irrelevant, and investors are going to weep if regulators come down hard on crypto, said Kevin O'Leary about Bitcoin.
Yeah, he's a small-minded guy. That's
a loser mentality.
He's got some success, but if you look him up and Wikipedia him, he's got a pretty dodgy background, and that's guy slipping and sliding, and he's trying. He's not a solid character, and he doesn't have solid values, and therefore he doesn't understand Bitcoin. Only people with solid values and solid characters can really understand Bitcoin. And again, that gets back to sisu, because sisu ultimately is a matter of character. So the Finns have an indomitable character that is a cultural artifact that they pass on generation to generation. And when war comes, they prevail. Same thing with Bitcoin. It has indomitable character. It attracts indomitable characters. And now there is no foe too great. There is no battle that can't be won. And this 300-year experimentation with central banks and fiat money is coming to a close. They're very fortunate. I believe the millennials, I talked to some millennials recently, and they are totally prepped for this. I mean, they're the biggest demographic, bigger than the baby boomers. They're totally smart, unlike, let's say, the slacker generations that took pride in not knowing anything. The millennials are like, no, we're going to kick butt. And Bitcoin is our money, and we're taking over. And I believe they are. I'm totally supporting of this millennials. And I was, 3 years ago, I was making jokes about millennials because I didn't know anything about it. Now that I know about it, I'm like, wow, these millennials are powerful. They're ready they're primed. They're on the front line. They've got their Bitcoin, and it's going to work.
Well, there is a tweet stream a thread that went viral this week from a Generation Z. Actually, I think he's 21 years old. Bitcoin Labrador, Bitcoin Lab is his handle, and he credits Max and Stacy, Orange Pill, and a few other people for helping him on this journey. 10 months ago, he got into Bitcoin, and his journey is amazing. Okay, how it radically altered his life in terms of his health, his well-being, his that sisu, that it's hard to, there's no word to describe that power that you have. And remember, this is as sisu, it's an action mindset. It's not just even being determined, sitting back and surviving central bankers. It's taking action. It's actually embracing life. In fact, it says in the Wikipedia, it's about, it's embracing life. It's embracing it's like that line in Train Spotting where choose life, like you choose life. It's actually human action.
Right. Well, okay. So contrast that with Rubini and somebody who's an entrepreneur, right? Entrepreneurs take action, and by definition, they're going to make mistakes, and their success is determined by how they deal with their mistakes, not how they deal with their success. That's actually a concept from Plutarch, going back to the classics. He said, judge a man by how he deals with failure, not success. And whereas Rubini, because he's an academic, there is no failure. He never loses. He just publishes papers. He gets tenure probably at New York University. Can't fire him. And he can say any silly thing he wants to say. But he's not tested. It's ironic because he's a professor, but he himself never faces a test. And he'll continue to get paid, and he'll get a big pension. But he's not a guy of strong character. And he lives in the fiat world, and the fiat world has made him have what little character he may have had at one point, lose that completely. So now he's really a shambolic shell of a former academic, and just becoming grotesquely comical on the world stage with his constant ankle biting like a drug-addled chihuahua at the heels of the Bitcoiners. And the only thing we can do is to just gently brush them aside. You don't want to hurt the guy, right? I mean, if you have some little doggy biting at your foot, you don't want to step on the doggy, right? That's cruel. You just got to little doggy, stop humping my leg, little doggy. And that's what when I hear Nouriel Roubini, it's like a dog humping my leg. I'm like, God damn it, I don't want my leg in my hump now. Get off my leg, Nouriel. Stop trying to hump my leg. And you just got to brush him aside. It's the most humane thing you can do. You don't put him down. Don't send him to the pound. Just brush him aside and realize he's messed up in the head. There's nothing we can do about it at this point. The fiat world destroyed his brain. It turned into jelly.
And again, here we have Kevin O'Leary on CNBC. What he said is, quote, I'm waiting for the day that one of these regulators comes down hard on Bitcoin. Grown men are going to weep when that happens. You'll never see a loss of capital like that ever in your life. It will be brutal. Think of the mindset of this guy. He is filled with hate. You could see that. He's fearful. He's afraid. And he's appealing to authority to come save him. Whereas the Bitcoin community, they will never weep. They might laugh, they might cry with tears,
of joy.
From joy, right? That even as Bitcoin's drop, if it drops 90%, they laugh as hard as they do when it goes up to 28,000. You can't destroy the spirit of the Bitcoin community.
No. This guy Kevin O'Leary, who he usually goes up against Pomp, and to give Pomp credit, Pomp is really the perfect guy to foil Kevin O'Leary because he's young. He looks good on TV. He's a Bitcoiner. And when you look at the guy, he doesn't even actually say anything. He just exudes confidence because he's living the Bitcoin life. He's living his best Bitcoin life. And that just comes across. I do a lot of TV and I can see it. He doesn't have to say anything. And you look at him and you're like, this guy, I believe this guy more than this baldy, fat, old, characterless peanut pusher. And then he does say good stuff as well. But, this is an unfair fight. They should stop the fight. They should get rid of Kevin O'Leary and bring on Paul Tudor Jones to talk to Pomp. Pomp and Tudor Jones, Pomp and Michael Saylor. Let's, CNBC. In 2017, they had on the Freak Show. They had Roger Ver and all these freaks came on, and it was horrible. Now, okay, they got some real Bitcoiners in there. That's good. But now take it to the next level, CNBC. You want to get real about Bitcoin. Get rid of that guy who recommended Ripple at $2.50 Kevin somebody. What was his name?
I don't
forget.
know.
I don't know. But get rid of those
I don't
losers.
really pay attention to much of mainstream media, but I know people do, and those are the losers out there. And again, Orange Pill Podcast, we're about this mindset that it is your mindset that you yourself, you are on your journey. You can choose either to be a loser or to be a winner. Now, the Finns went up against the Soviet Empire and they won. The Dutch, the French, they folded immediately when the Nazi Empire, when the German Empire invaded them, right? Like,
I know about the Finns. We lost 10 games in a row to the Finns back
hockey.
in 1976. I was part of an American junior hockey, team. We went to Helsinki. We played 10 games in 3 different locations and lost all 10 games because the Finns were like
sisu. They have sisu.
They were like, well, the one thing we found out, the rinks are wider, and I'm a defenseman, and so there's like another foot there. And, and they just will skate right around there. I was like, wait, come back.
They're born on ice, just like the Canadians. But their sport is not, bizarrely, it's not hockey like it is in Canada. It is ski jumping. It's, you have to have sisu.
So how do you even practice ski jumping?
That's the question I have is like, how do you get to that point where you're like flying against gravity and you decide like, I'm going to take on gravity, right? Like that's insane, right? That's one of the strongest forces in the universe. And I decide I'm going to take it on. Yeah.
It's like a cultural thing. Like the dad says to the son, I want you to ski down this slope, go about 90 miles an hour and then fly off the end. And there's a lot of wind up there and you'll probably die.
Exactly.
But you might land and you might not break your leg. And in that case, they're going to probably do it again and again and again for years until you go to the Olympics. And the kid's like, okay, Dad, that's a great idea because I know you did it and Granddad did it, and you all fought the Red Army back in the day. And before that, you were, chopping down trees with your bare arms.
On the back of a reindeer.
On the back of a reindeer. And before that, you were all part of the Kavala, which is like the Finnish.
Kalevala.
The Kalevala. That's like the Finnish creation myth. You want to read a strange book? Okay, read that book. That's where all these Finns come from. They're wacko. Okay, they eat bark. Well, they don't know anything.
The thing that I want to impart to you as we wrap up here is that just you are on your own journey. It's up to you. Learn from mistakes. Some people have to learn from mistakes. That's kind of my path that I take. It's a hard one. I still own silver, for example. I haven't quite learned my lesson. Some people can go and just learn from an online course and they get it. Go to Dr. Safedeen Amusa's online course at safedeen.com and you can learn. Go research sisu. I was born and raised with it, but, you might learn new lessons from it. But I'm telling you here because not many people may have heard of it. So it's an interesting way just to look at Buddhism and look at the world through a Buddhist perspective. The same thing is like look at it through the sisu perspective and because it's created, it's a social construct. Like that means you can also create that sort of determination, grit. There's no real word for it, but that you could create this sort of fortitude inside.
It's like battery acid meets stoicism.
Yeah, I guess so.
I know that's a quick take.
Linking it all to you, the ski jumper, he's considered the Diego Maradona of ski jumpers, the greatest in history. His name, let's see if I have it written down here, Matti Nikkanen. And he came up with this phrase. He was famous for his one-liners. And he just died last year at the age of 55. But he came up with the phrase, the odds are 50-60 to describe a situation when things could take a turn either way.
Yeah, that's a kind of a sisu statement, I guess, if you unpack that a little bit, because... yeah. He's saying that he believes in a higher power, essentially, the higher power of ski jumping, because it's greater than 100%. That the odds are, even if the odds are against me, the odds are still for me.
Exactly. There's still a 50% chance I might survive. Like, he's like, no, the odds are against you. How can you? So he's being optimistic. It's a Finnish way of being optimistic. Because if it's 60% against you, theoretically, you should be a loser.
If you're
right?
60% against you, I still have a 50% chance of winning.
Yeah.
Right? That's a good Finnish mindset. I think, as I understand it. I mean, you're a Finnish American. You would have greater insight into this. I'm just hearing about that. What's his name?
It was Matti Naikkonen.
Matti Naikkonen.
But the thing that relates to you is that he was, again, like the greatest ski jumper in history, won many Olympic gold medals, and then he became a stripper. He was a stripper.
What? I'm loving this guy. When you see the winter sports, hockey, you got to get a great ass. Because when you're skating, you're pushing off with your maximus gluteus, right? So, do that for 10 years. You got an ass tighter than Jane Fonda's.
Max is most proud of his ass.
Yeah, so to be a stripper is a natural career choice for a ski jumper, in my view. And, I'm sorry. I'm going to look that up on YouTube to see if he's on any videos. This could be a remarkable revelation. What's his name?
Matti Haikkonen. He did do like a few months or years in prison for stabbing somebody, but things happen. So, just because you have sisu doesn't mean you might fall off the, he had problems with alcohol and stuff like that. But nevertheless, what I'm saying is this episode was about sisu. You don't need to be a loser. You could be a winner, and no matter what the situation.
Even if the 60% certainty of losing, you still have a 50% chance of winning. Right? That's Bitcoin for you. All right. Bye, y'all.
And join us tomorrow night for our cocktail party on Zoom. We're going to send out the link in the Orange Pill podcast Telegram.
I'm going to set up a ski jumping right here, and I'm going to ski jump. First, I'm going to do a ski jump.
And you're going to show people your butt?
I'm going to show people my ass while I'm ski jumping right all the way down over 3 feet. A 3-foot jump into a pole dance. That's a good. I'm combining actually ski jumping and pole dancing. Okay, that's something Maki Maktu never got into. Okay, you jump. You ever seen those ones where people ski down the mountain and then they jump into the water? Their bathing suits are on and they're swimming, right? I mean, it's like
the Finns jump from the sauna into the ice.
Right. So I could have my whole pole dancing outfit on under my ski jumping outfit. And then I just go right down the slope. Okay, land down onto the pole dancing stage, and I'm flashing my cheeks, all in the same show.
So with Max flashing his cheeks, make sure to go visit swanbitcoin.com/Max, and you might see a photo of his cheeks there.
Yeah, you could very well. It's either me or Jane Fonda.